Welcome. This is the After the Glass Break series. I'm your host, David Harrison. Throughout this series, we will take a candid look through the lenses of culturally diverse technology leaders to discuss their rise through the glass ceiling and what happens immediately after the glass break. Today's guest is Dawn E. Freeman, principal owner and CEO at Fort Don LLC. And for those of you who didn't just get that, her initials are DEF, which is most deaf. So this is definitely going to be a great ride. Dawn, welcome to the ride.
Hello there. It's a pleasure to be on with you, David. I look forward to this conversation and just sharing some of my journey.
Awesome. So happy to have you here. And so how we'll do is we're going to take the audience on a journey. The journey will give a perspective about you, where you grew up, what are the things you've seen throughout your personal and professional career? And when did you recognize the glass ceiling, or did you even recognize that it existed? So we're going to bring the audience full circle here within our conversations and understanding of you and your whole entire journey, if you will, on full display for the audience. So to start, Dawn, just give us basic information about you. Where did you grow up?
Yes, so I am a military brat. So I was born in North Chicago area and moved around quite a bit when I was younger. Have a lot of family in Wisconsin, Racine, Wisconsin, and then ultimately landed in Norfolk, Virginia, which has a large naval base. So I like to say I was born in Chicago, but I grew up in Norfolk, Virginia, the Tidewater area.
Very nice. So as you grew up, what were some of the people that you saw in your immediate area? I mean, what were some of the professionals that you dealt with growing up?
I would say probably minimal in terms of growing up. So not really exposed to corporate America or business necessarily. I got a lot of, I would say, what groomed me for that professional journey that I was about to take was really a lot of my educators. And in elementary, middle school, high school, I vividly remember the one that stands out the most was my fifth grade teacher, Miss Parker. And Miss Parker didn't play. So she was all about business. And if she saw me showing out, she would pull me to the side. It's like, you know, you have work to do. There's a bigger expectation, a demand she put on me because she saw something in me that I didn't recognize. And so that really, I'll never forget her is the best way I could describe it. I would never forget her and who she represented, as my future self, who she was to me in that regard. Once I started working in corporate America, it was other individuals. So I had early exposure to leadership at the beginning of my career, and that started the trajectory for me.
Awesome. Yeah, in my history, I've said it before, it was my high school physics teacher that saw what you just mentioned that Ms. Parker saw in you, that saw something in me that I didn't see because I didn't have the resources or the exposure growing up to understand that this world even existed, right? As I mentioned before, the things that I grew up around my neighborhood is that either you were a manager of a store somewhere, or you were a teacher or a principal. Those were the high watermarks that I saw growing up as well. Which again, it's all about exposure and all about resourcing and networking. And all it takes one to kind of get you to understand that the world is bigger than that 3-mile radius that we've grown up with and understood within our neighborhood perspective that we thought the world was. So let's take a few steps back, right? So you decided to go off to school. When you went off to college, what were some of the things that influenced you that make you believe that I want to take a run at corporate America?
Well, it's kind of ironic you bring that up because my early childhood years were not good. So my home life experience was just unstable is the best way I could describe it. So not a stable environment and education. And I apologize. Now everybody wants to text me. But my education was my escape. And so, I really threw myself into high school, and I had the opportunity to graduate a year early and I was accepted into Virginia State University. And I was so excited because I really saw that as my way out of the situation that I was in, not really knowing what I was going to. I just knew, I felt it in my being that this is something huge. And I was so excited for that. But during, due to a lot of different events and challenging things in my home life, I was not able to go. And so the best way I could describe it was just crushed. And so I had to revert and kind of succumb to my life is going to be exactly what you described. A manager at a store somewhere, I just felt like it was impossible. And I ultimately found myself at, several well-known companies. First, I came in as a file clerk and people just gravitated to me. So that leadership quality was always there. And I didn't recognize it as such. I'm there in a lower level kind of entry role, but I was the go-to person for just figuring out how the systems work and how to, I could just think through, this is the way we need to do it. And everybody listened. I don't know why, but they just did. And so when I transitioned to a company by the name of Towers Parent, and I started working there, I was immediately taken under the wing of the director of the unit that I work for. And again, I don't know what he saw in me, but he brought me in and was like, hey, I'm going to give you this project to do on the side. And that kind of just started it off. And I got to witness his rise, in his journey through leadership into the upper levels and C-suite of that particular division. And it was a blessing because I got to see more intimately the operations, not me being in the role, but me witnessing someone else and how they went through that journey. And I really just gravitated to that. And that led me to say, you know what, I'm going to try this school thing again. So I applied for college, got accepted. And I still work full time. I had little children. I was still, in my prime. So I was, having kids. But I went to school full time in the evening, worked full time, climbed the corporate ladder, so to speak, in that space. And it was definitely a journey, but it was well worth it. It prepared me very well for where I ultimately landed.
So, help the audience understand what you just mentioned is core strength, right? What gave you that core strength? What was the mechanism inside you that said that, I'm a parent, I am a full-time worker, and I need to continue to grow as an individual? What was the power that you drawed upon to make that move?
Yeah, I mean, for me, and I'm very open about this, was my faith. I had a faith and a belief in God and what was possible, this promise of a better future. But honestly, taking faith off of the table, which is not something I would do personally, but even if you took faith off of the table, I had this innate, internal desire, like ringing in my head saying, there is more for you. There's more in the world. This is not the life that you're going to live, what you see around you, that there's more. There's work to do, but there's more. If you keep working, you'll get there. And that literally is what gave me the endurance to juggle all of these responsibilities and all of this demand on my time and how I utilize my time. That's what helped me kind of push through and push forward.
So you're, as what we grew up knowing is called a double minority, yeah. Right? Yeah. You are a female and you are a Black female. So you're now in a double minority status within what we know as corporate infrastructure. Carrying that moniker and the drive that you just took the audience to that gave you the strength to push forward, what made you believe that you could conquer some of these internal corporate challenges, knowing that you are a double minority?
I can't even honestly say that I thought about it in the moment. I was just doing. It wasn't until hindsight and looking back and how other people perceive me that I started to recognize, like, I'm doing something amazing here that, I wasn't even fully cognizant of. So in those moments, it wasn't intentional. My pinnacle was limited of what I thought was making it, and reaching this, ascension. So becoming a supervisor was like, I made it to supervisor, and I thought that was great because that was almost the highest level I had saw someone like me reach.
Right.
But then when opportunities and my own personal drive was kind of pushing me towards, no, I think you need to kick it up a notch. Like, let's try for that manager role, that director role, and then ultimately a VP position. Again, I wasn't as conscious in those mid-level management roles. But when I started getting into director and VP, I was definitely conscientious about it and intentional. One, because I had been exposed to it early in my career. I knew how to navigate or at least operate in those spaces, what I thought was the way appropriately to handle those spaces. And then once I got there, I realized that it is slightly different for me because I am a Black female.
Yeah, and that's one thing we want to really dig down into and get a better understanding for the audience to get emotionally connected to some of the things that you just mentioned, right? So in order to get emotionally connected to those things you just mentioned, I want to take a little bit more deeper view at some of the content that you just gave us. And I always like, you'll hear the term, I use the term cockpit. We're getting close to the cockpit. Yeah. And that's when you've broken the glass ceiling and you get to finally see how the plane is flown. So when you saw how the plane is actually operated, you've calculated and understood that, I am a double minority now moving into the cockpit arena. What was those first impressions? What was those first feelings that you felt? And then we're going to revert back to what were some of your friends and peers' opinions as you started to knock on that glass ceiling, and then when you finally came through, what were those emotions like?
Yeah, I would say once I entered the cockpit, it was different. There were a lot of things that were said and discussed that I had no idea what they were talking about. Multiples and just all these things that I was just like, no, wait a minute. This is not information that's typically discussed at lower levels. I just didn't have any frame of reference to really refer to. And so, but now I'm in the room, right? So now I'm in the cockpit. So I have to look the par and be the par and assume that I know what was going on. Thankfully for me, I had, an ally within that cockpit that I can go to and be a little bit more candid and say, okay, now exactly what does this mean? And how does this work? And how does this impact me? And how does this impact the bigger picture? And they were able and willing, and that's key, able and willing to, break it down in a way that I can understand. The other thing was I recognized that I still had work to do. So even though I had over prepared, I had, invested all this energy into making sure that I felt comfortable in that space, and that I deserved to be in that space, which innately, and this is something we've chatted about before, David, being a minority, we already know that there is a barrier there. So we go at it even harder. We work 3 times as hard as what we see our counterparts work. It's just certain things that is so ingrained in us that we're viewed as less than, that we do more. We overcompensate to make sure that we're comfortable and fitting and we feel like we've earned our spot, which we have. But when you get in that space, it's almost like you're starting all over again as a kid, right? Because now you're here and you're like, okay, I didn't. So I conquered the things that I saw, but there were so many things I did not see and I did not understand that almost felt like I'm starting all over again in this new space. But now there's an expectation of me in this room of my new peers that I just wasn't fully, I would say, prepared for.
So let's take one more step back. Again, emotionally connecting the audience with you. So there's an opening for a VP role at the current employer. You're looking at that opening. You're like, I can do this job. What made you feel comfortable enough, first of all, to go, I'm capable, I'm able, and I can succeed here? And then secondly, what made you push the send button on that application?
Well, for me, it was actually a little bit different how I rose to be a VP. It actually wasn't an opening. It was something that I positioned myself very well for in terms of the work that I was doing and an initiative that I had brought to the table. And I was operating in that space in a director role. And eventually that got recognized and they created a role for me. So, which was a blessing. One, because it really spoke to the level of effort and energy that they recognized, they being my peers and whom I was subordinate to. They recognized that and said, okay, yes, the quality and this type of work that you're doing deserves to be at this level. And so the role was created for me. And that was a huge opportunity and blessing. It brought more pressure, right? Because it wasn't an existing position that now I really have to perform and rise to the occasion. What made me feel prepared was that I had supported at least that group of individuals for a long time. I interacted and worked with them for years. So I felt comfortable. I knew my job. I knew the business. I understood, the expectations of what I brought to the table. And I was very confident in that. What I wasn't prepared for was the things that, like you said, once you get into the cockpit and you see all the other instruments and tools of how it actually navigates, that's where it was kind of like, all right, now what just happened? What just happened?
That's always that shock factor when you actually get to see all the switches and buttons. So now you're a VP. So let's take it back again, emotionally connecting you with the audience. Let's take it back to your family. So now you're a VP. So how was the community around you understood now what your role was, and were you the first person in your family to hold an executive position?
Yes, well, it's kind of twofold, and maybe this story, my journey resonates and maybe it doesn't. But, for me, I was raised primarily on my mother's side of the family. So that's all I knew. I knew my dad, but we weren't actively involved with each other in my dad's side of the family. So on my mother's side of the family, I had been the first at a lot of levels. So as the manager, I was the first. As the director, I was the first. As the, VP, I was the first. So there was a level of pride, I think, that they felt in just the expectations, because and I'm more candid, right? And a little bit more open, but it was almost like, oh, you've arrived. Now, can we have this? Can we have that? And, can you make this phone call? And it's like, okay, it doesn't necessarily work like that. But, there was a lot of pride that they had. Now, for me, I needed them to be consistent. I didn't want to have to put on this cape at home as well. I wanted to be able to let my hair down and be the Dawn they always have known. But I think they saw me differently, not in a bad way, but they saw me differently. And so it just became a constant space of always performing, instead of just being able to let my guard down and say, "Ooh, okay, take this off," and just relax and, just be my authentic self in my home life.
And the reason I want to get that emotional connection here is because I want the audience to understand that, we grew up on two different worlds, but if you look at our worlds, you would think we were neighbors, right? So, and you would literally think maybe we grew up in the same family, because a lot of the parallels that exist in our world, which is basically I was a lot of first in my family as well. And, I'm the first to, run a company. I was the first to be a C-suite. I was the first to be a VP. And you're right. Some of the family is applauding you, and some of the family looks at you like, oh, now he's better than us. Mm-hmm. And so we carry those burdens that the corporate America and the broader audience outside of our community don't understand and can't relate to, because that doesn't exist in other cultures, right? And that better than us mentality that exists in our culture tends to cause rifts, even though we should be celebrated.
Right.
Sometimes we're demonized because now you're a part of something that we'll never be a part of. So now you believe you're better than us because you've ascended to greats that we hadn't ascended to. And it's not that way, right? So, and again, just for the audience perspective, a Black or minority or affinity group executive has a lot of scars. And those scars really help us drive. It gives us fuel, it gives us fire that inherently we shouldn't have.
It's the baggage that we have to carry that others don't have, right? We have baggage that we bring on the plane with us that's a lot deeper than just showing up for work every day. But it's when we're at home, the other minorities, Black and brown, within the company that now view us differently or come to us with expectations of, well, you're Black, so you got to do all these things for us. And it's kind of like, I'm still trying to figure this out myself. And it's not that we're not aware or that we don't want to do anything, but that's additional pressure that we feel. And that baggage, it gets heavy at times, because then you start feeling isolated, and then you feel misunderstood. You don't have an ally that really gets what you're mentally going through. And yet you still have to perform and to some extent compete with your majority peers that are, within that cockpit with you, who have no idea that all these other things are going on. And in some instances, may even shame you when they see other minorities kind of taking to you, and then make assumptions that, oh, they're coming to you because you're rallying and in your mind, you're like, I'm not rallying anybody. I'm trying to figure this out myself. Now I'm aware, and I'm not, dismissive towards those that see me as, because it is true when you're a person of color or a female, and you rise to that level, you do have others that look up to you and, see you as an inspiration of, okay, what can I do to get there? How did you get there? And a lot of times you can't even really articulate that for yourself, let alone to another person. You can help them in those moments and give them tips for where they are and say, these are some additional things that you can do, which 99% of the time more so relates to them working on themselves and less about, complete this project and then you'll make it. Like it's not that, it's not that simple. There's internal work that you need to do, but then there's also internal work that we're still doing as we're evolving as well.
Exactly. And it's a different mindset, a different way of thinking. And when we walk into that room, and the next thing that we don't see is us. When I say us, anyone from the infinity table associated with a professional networking conglomerate that exists today. So now you're in the room, now you're in the cockpit, now you're looking at the buttons and switches. At what point in time did you feel like you had a voice? You're there. You've been placed there. You earned the right to be there. When did you think that, okay, I have a voice in this room? Or at what point in time did you question, do I belong in the room?
I would say, I don't know for me that I ever felt like I belonged within myself. And not to say that my peers didn't feel like I belonged. I felt like I didn't belong because honestly, there were times where I held back intentionally, or I may have had a thought or a comment, but I didn't want to be viewed. There was just certain ways that, conversations or discussions or meetings that were going, that had I chimed in or responded in the same way that I witnessed, it wouldn't have been received the same. And so I just kept my mouth shut, or I would share it separately with one or two allies, and almost leveraging it. It's sad, but true. I had a woman approach me one time and just said, I'm a, we're both we're females in leadership. And she said, if I want, as long as I don't care who gets the credit and what I'm saying actually matters and it's a solution, I'll tell my white male counterpart so he can go in the room and say what I would have said so it can be received. Because now I'm beyond the I need credit for it. And it's more about let's move the ball forward. Let's get this action or the solution in place. And I took to that. I did. And so I would let, my confidant or ally open the discussion, and then I would chime in. And that seemed to work for me. So kind of going back to your original question, I don't know that I ever felt truly comfortable, just because I didn't want to put a bullseye or a target on myself in some way, shape, or form that can be perceived as just in a negative light. So I intentionally held back in some regards. Now, I say all of that. I'm a very strong-willed person. If it's, my area, I have no problem speaking up for that. But when it was areas or things that were being discussed that I wasn't as confident in, I would just not give an opinion, which to me could be viewed as a disservice to the broader conversation, because bringing different perspectives helps make everyone better. And so it just makes me reflect on that and say, I probably could have done more. But again, it was a me thing, not necessarily a room thing.
Yeah. So, and you bring to life what I want the audience to understand. There's two glass ceilings for us. The actual getting into the cockpit. And then there's another glass ceiling that exists in our mind that I'm in the cockpit. I don't want to upset the cockpit, nor do I want to seem as an aggressor in the cockpit. Yeah. And so even now, even today, in my professional career that spans 25 plus years, and most of that being in an executive seat, I still find myself holding back in those broader conversations. And for some of the reasons you just said. Now, I would do the exact same thing. Even today, I'll do that. I'll hit counterparts like, well, this is what I would do, right? Versus being expressive in that room. And again, we want to be accepted. We want to be a part of the group, but we don't want to be bullish in that organization to think, okay, well, now here they go again, right? And so there's a second glass that exists that we must navigate and eventually start chipping away, where we can feel that we can be just as expressive as our white counterparts in the room. We can be just as open to our thoughts, and we can challenge the room, right? And that's the other thing. I tend not to challenge the room anymore, right? Even though in my mind and my experience says that's probably the wrong direction you should take, because that second glass ceiling and you're still trying to fill it out, you don't push and challenge, right? You sit back and go, well, and you take notes for yourself and you think in your mind, like, I definitely wouldn't do that. And again, just like you, I'm very strong-willed and I'm very opinionated about things, and I'm very expressive about things because I have a broad range of capabilities similar to yourself throughout my professional career, but we tend to not push as hard as we should, because there's a second glass ceiling. Whether it's real or not, right, it's real to us.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing I would add to that is, in those moments, we also know that there are some that don't want to hear from us. And those that don't want to hear from us or have, you just know, right? And you can't even put your finger on, well, because they did X, Y, Z, or because they said X, Y, Z. You know, you know which ones are going to, if you raise a challenge, they're coming for you. Now, in a way where it almost makes you feel less than and little, and little in those moments. And so it's one of the reasons why, at least for me, I would choose to be quiet in those moments. The other thing is, this level of fear that if you're the first or the only of your minority group, or, whether it be sex or race, you don't want to mess up that potential. So you're also mindful of the people behind you who may be aspiring to that place where you are currently. And you don't want to set the tone that this is how they all act, and it's
exactly.
Like, no, I have an opinion. I am me. I'm an individual. I have an opinion. And while I may witness others be more expressive and open and do certain things, I'm just more conscientious that I can't respond in that way for fear that it may close the door or, reestablish that glass where new glass is blown. And now another person like me, that looks like me, that's the same sex as me, may not get in that room. And what it drives me to is just conformity, which I don't know if we're going to go there within the conversation, but just thinking about the ways in which I've had to conform over the years to even get there, how I've had to conform while I'm there. It's just it's a difficult road to navigate mentally. And it takes a lot of pressure. It's all these different faces you have to wear in those moments. And it's unfortunate, but I'm glad that we're having this conversation to highlight it, to give people, one, to create that awareness for our majority counterparts, but then also give permission for individuals in these executive roles and positions now to be more open about, I do have something to say, but, I'm worried about it. I stress about this. I think about it when I go home. Well, after the meeting's over, said and done, I still have the tape replaying in my head of all the things I would have said and how I can say it, trying to formulate an email to get my points across and rereading it to make sure it doesn't come across as too aggressive or, it's just certain things that now I have to expend a lot more energy that my counterparts don't. They just say what they need to say and they don't stress about it. Whereas for me, I'm constantly thinking about how does this come across, not only to peers, but even subordinates, whether within my department or division or within someone else's, because I don't want that to bubble up to the top. And then now it's, well, Dawn said and Dawn did, and, so now we're playing this game.
Yeah. And you said a statement through that content that it's really powerful. And I think we need to unpack a little bit of that here. Conformity.
Yeah.
Right. That's something that exists for us wearing the executive suit, if you will, to conform. We tend to back away from being our natural selves and try to morph. And I just say this all the time. I'm the best comedian you've ever seen. I can morph to anything in the room to be like the room versus being my like self. And that is something that the audience needs to take in to understand that, again, heavy as the head that wears a crown, try to put two on.
Right.
Right.
With shoes and outfits and armor that are not comfortable to you, not normal to you. So yeah. That's so key. One of the things that, as part of my journey from, entry-level roles and positions up to executive level and then, running my own nonprofit, that I would say I was consistent on was, my dress, how I wore, what shoes I wore. There were like two things that I just wasn't going to bend. And that was how I wore my hair, within reason, how I wore my hair, and the types of shoes that I wore. So I love stiletto shoes. I like to be fashionable, not, raunchy or anything along those lines, but I like to be fashionable. And those were just certain things that, I kind of laugh and smile to myself that there was a policy or rule that was made at one organization where stiletto heels were no longer allowed, only like wider, chunky heels, right, for women. And it came about because someone had stepped in a crack in their heels and tripped in the parking lot or something like that. And I just remember the VP of HR saying, all right, well, this rule is in place, but there are two individuals here. And I was one of them. That is not, because every shoe I had was a stiletto. And that just was who I was. And so it was like, we know this would be an issue, and they never approached me about it. But it was one of those things, after the fact, when we talked about it, I was just like, I thanked her and I appreciated her being mindful of that, because that would have made me feel isolated, because that was inherently who I was. I just liked those types of shoes. There wasn't anything outrageous to me from a cultural perspective. But the thing that did give me pause was how I wore my hair. So I would wear extensions and weaves and things along those lines. And so people were comfortable with that. I would always tell people, don't get invested into one hairstyle, because I'm going to change it. So you're going to have to get used to my face, because the hairstyle will change. But when I made the decision to go natural, so as an African-American woman, most of the time we put relaxers to make our hair straight versus curling. But I would relax my hair and wear styles that were, again, conformist in nature, to kind of fit in and not look differently.
Right.
And when I decided to go natural, I cut off all my hair at one time. So I went from having weaves and different hairstyles to now I was essentially, bald head. I had a low fade. And I just remember some people looking at that like, what in the world is wrong with you? And then for people of my race, they understood. I won't say all accepted, but they understood, like, hey, power to the people kind of thing. And right. I didn't do it. For me, it had nothing to do with any of that. I did it because I had thyroid issues and my hair was coming out, and continuing to relax it was just damaging my scalp and all these other kinds of things. And so I did it for the health of my hair, not because I was making some powerful statement. So people take things and kind of morph it into other reasons. And for me, it was for my own health and needs in that regard. But then I started to get a little bit more. So as my hair grew out in certain things, putting braids in my hair and, adding a little bit of color to my hair and things along those lines. Those are things I absolutely paused and thought about before going into the workplace, because for some, and again, no one blatantly comes out and says, oh, your hair is not professional, but you get enough looks, you get enough side eyes that that people perceive that as not being professional, but it's right. Who I am. And so I'm going to share this with you, and then I'll be quiet so you can comment. I told you I'm a talker. But I had the pleasure this past weekend to sit in on a session and learn from an amazing woman. She's now the CEO of Essence, and she made a statement, and her presentation was about who I am is non-negotiable. So, the clothes that I wear, how I wear my hair, that has nothing to do with the substance of what's in my mind, what I bring to the table. It's an outward appearance. That also relates to the color of my skin and the sex that I am. These are things that I did not choose, but the things that I can choose, what I wear, how I wear my hair, that's who I am. It doesn't take away from my abilities and skills. I'm still educated. I still bring gifts and talents to the table that should be respected, no matter what my hair looks like, no matter what clothes I have on. that's a lot to take in, but it is a reality. And even not just from a Black thing, just think about other cultures, people from Indian descent or African descent or from, Asia. We all have cultural differences. Native Americans, we're culturally different. And we have to really make, as corporate America or people in leadership positions, be thoughtful and make room for people to express themselves in that way, without shunning it or shushing it and putting it in a back corner and saying you must conform to our look and style of dress in order to be, promotable or accepted and respected in the workplace.
Yeah, and that's that's a lot to unpack, and I would love to, at another time, bring you back to unpack that, because you're touching on some very sensitive areas that exist in corporate America. And again, bringing forth DE&I is supposed to start forming and shaping corporate America so they understand the norms and cultures, and embrace those cultures and accept those cultures within the corporate infrastructure. And you said something that really resonated to me. It's not how I look that should matter. It's my performance I bring that should give me just cause to be here. And that performance is what everything needs to be geared upon. We got a little more time here. I want to take one quick run at, you did something that a lot of us in the community don't have the bravery, and I did it as well, which was to leave corporate America, get out and start your own company. And we talked about this a little bit. Financial and financing and raising capital is something that is totally foreign to most of Brown and Black and affinity groups. It's foreign to us. And that networking is a very foreign place. We got to the cockpit of a corporate entity, so we understand how corporate America works and how corporate America is driven. But when you're out on your own, and now you have to go and figure out, how do I get money to get my business off the ground? What was that like? Like, again, we talked about the double minority approach. Now you're a Black female who's left a great corporate position. And as we talked about before, I know family and friends are like, what is wrong with her? She has reached the pinnacle where she should be, and why is she leaving that? And doesn't make logical sense. But when you did it, what were some of the key learnings you want to share with our audience? And again, just, we're going to go relatively fast through this, but I think it's important.
Yeah, absolutely. And this was one of the things we talked about, David, in the kind of pre-meeting, was the, when you make that, when you come to terms with it in yourself, like, okay, I've reached as high as I'm going to get in this space. Because for one reason, there's only one CEO position, and so everybody can't have it. But even, being true to yourself and your goals and your mission, just taking that step, that leap of faith, and seeking to strike out on your own, that's huge in and of itself. And in those moments when you make that profession and announcement, a lot of times you may get that side eye look, like, what's wrong with you now? Like, what else why aren't you satisfied with this kind of role and position? You're somewhere that a lot of people that look like you, and this primarily comes from family and friends, the comments or thoughts that I'm sharing now. Like, why would you walk away from that? And for me, it was the passion and belief of what it is that I wanted to do with my life. And again, it was about me in those moments. It wasn't to take anything away from the organization or corporation. It was my own personal desire to do, to move forward and to grow in that way. And it had never steered me, wrong up to this point. That's what got me to where I was. So I wasn't going to deny myself of that now that I had reached, this standard way of living. So I wanted to go out here and be an entrepreneur, which I never thought I would. But when, when God put that on my heart, I ran towards it. I'm still learning the whole navigating the funding and that piece. I was able, again, as a blessing, to fund my initial, so I put up the capital myself for the starting work, to get the organization started. But what I will say is, what I'm doing now and what I've done previously is show up as myself authentically, and work relationships. So a lot of it is relationship driven, whether it's a position, it's a promotion, whatever the case may be. 9 times out of 10, it's who you know, not what you know. And exactly. That was a big like eye opener for me getting into the cockpit and even in this space. A lot of times it's not what you know, because there are some people that may not know the area or the field that they're working in, but through relationships, they open doors for each other, which is something that doesn't typically exist in our culture. Yeah. And so being that door opener, having those great relationships and really working them, not seeking to, hi, I want to meet you because I would like you to, contribute 25,000, 3 million or whatever to my organization, but to truly establish that, reciprocal relationship with each other, that really, I think is going to be what works for me best. But I would say just showing up as my authentic self, sharing what I don't know. So I'm a very transparent person. So I will share my journey, what I've been through, what I learned, what I'm still learning, aspiring to learn. And people respect that. And they respect it because then if they're making that financial investment in you, they I think that gives them a sense of comfort that you're not showing up as, yes, I know everything about everything. Right. You're being open and honest that, this is a journey and a process. So walk this journey with me. And most people love to teach, and especially if their dollars are behind it. They want to make sure, that you get it right. And I tend to gravitate towards those types of people and organizations.
That is absolutely awesome. Well, Ms. Def, yeah. It has been a beautiful journey. I want to thank you for being very candid and joining me on this ride. I have enjoyed every moment of our conversation. You have left the audience and me wanting to know more about you, wanting to get a better understanding of the plight and the considerations that you've gone throughout your journey. You have a beautiful story, and I will leave you and my audience with what I always leave with. They can't be what they can't see. You must be present. You must be seen. And this is our opportunity to be seen. There are little Dons and little Davids out there who have no idea that they can aspire to be what we are and what we have struggled to get to. So they can't be what they can't see. Let's allow them to see. Thank you all. I appreciate you joining us on this ride. We have another ride coming up in this series. It's going to be just as great as this ride. Until next time, I appreciate you.